Hello, my name is Stefanie Kaiser. I am the Commercial Sexual Exploitation Coordinator for the Child Advocacy Center located in Wentzville. It was formerly known as the Child Center. They do forensic interviewing of children. Prior to coming to them, I worked as a detective with the St. Charles City Police Department. I've got about almost 30 years of police experience total. The Just before I retired, I worked 16, 17 years in the Detective Bureau. Most of the cases that I worked there, just giving you a little bit of background, the cases that I worked mostly included children victims. The cases were all persons crimes, so that would include adult victims as well, but they were crimes against children that would include like physical abuse, sexual abuse, um, pretty violent stuff. So the point I'm making with that is that when you have a case against a child victims would often, depending on the type of case, but most often be referred to the Child Center in Wentzville so that the kids could be interviewed forensically by someone trained to do exactly that, to get those child statements, to build a criminal case, but also to give the kids a chance to tell what happened to them so they could be referred on from there for therapy and uh, medical treatment if necessary, depending on what type of case it was. So I worked closely with them, and then upon retiring, starting in January of this year, so I've been out here for 9 months now, I came to work with them. A little bit about my background and working closely with them. So I was familiar with them and lucky to work with them. So my job title shortened is CSEC coordinator. That involves child exploitation and trafficking and coordinating all the different aspects of that and working with the team. That's a little bit of the background. Today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about a criminal case I did work when I wasn't working as a detective. And the reason for this particular case is because it closely mirrors, it does have aspects of child exploitation, the trafficking aspect, and it does involve kids. The reason for the title here that you're looking at is Everything But the Kitchen Sink, is because it really did involve so many different aspects, including not one, but two suspects, two adult suspects, a male and a female, multiple child victims that ultimately did come out to the Child Center to be interviewed. And then it included a whole host of people. If you're not familiar with the term MDT, which is what a child would, when you work in a child case, an entire multidisciplinary team, MDT, that's the approach that is taken when you're investigating cases involving kids. This particular case involved more than just your typical MDT, in the fact that it also had other aspects of the team. I'm gonna stop recording so you can just watch the presentation and listen to what I have to say about that. But that's the reason for the Everything But the Kitchen Sink title. So like I was alluding to, a typical response for a child case, once a hotline is received and there's some aspect with the child involved, the response would look like this. You'd have law enforcement, children's division when the hotline's received, and then from there would just be determined what else would be needed. Oftentimes it would include medical services, eventually the prosecuting attorney's office once the case may be investigated to its completion, child and family advocacy services. Mental health may also be involved with that, but this is what a typical MDT might look like. Then there are other disciplines that might also be involved. In the particular case that I'm going to discuss, that was exactly the case. The case I'm going to talk about also included things like code enforcement, animal control, ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Against Children, and then other discipline, well, just other people like road officers, as opposed to just the Detective Bureau. We have just other people like that were also included. And when we're talking about the kitchen sink, in fact, there was an actual kitchen sink. This is a crime scene photo of, this is an actual crime scene photo of the house where most of the crimes I'm discussing did take place. This isn't the dirtiest house I've ever seen, but in fact, this is kind of an overall view of what the house itself looked like. So when I talked about code enforcement a second ago, for anyone who's not familiar, code enforcement would be those folks that take care of like county and muni ordinances, anything ranging from like tall grass where your vehicles can be stored if it's like a recreational vehicle, up to and including things like dirty houses where they might go in and condemn buildings that aren't safe, and like houses that aren't safe, not ready or couldn't be inhabitable. And just to be clear, I'm going to be discussing an actual case that I did investigate. Some of the topics, they are sensitive. I have I've sanitized this particular presentation, so I'm not using any real names, and I'm not identifying I'm not identifying the people that actually were in this particular case. So if I use a name, it's not a real name, but it's still a sensitive topic, and we're talking about some pretty tough stuff here. So I alluded to the fact that this particular job title and what I'm tasked with doing is talking about and working with exploited kids and human trafficking. When we think about that, this particular case I'm going to discuss happened and occurred back in 2015, 2016. And even back then, working in the Detective Bureau, the idea about human trafficking exploitation, I think a lot of people relate to this particular slide here, or they think that with the Hollywood version taken. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. But if you don't let my daughter go, I will find you. I will kill you. Taken was so popular, I believe there were 3 different movies of that. This idea that someone who's trafficked is locked up in a cage or taken in a white van and then whisked away, never to be seen again, is not accurate. And I hope that you'll see that through the course of my conversation with this particular case. The people that I'm going to talk about were able to come and go. They're not locked in a cage. They attend school. The kids did. They attend school. Cell phones, money, supportive parents in a different home. So just keep that in mind. But I will tell you this, that when I'm working this case as well, the idea of, do I have a child trafficking case, didn't cross my mind either. I wasn't thinking along those lines. I was looking at the case and realizing, hey, I have a crime that's going on here, but a child trafficking case or exploitation didn't exactly cross my mind either. So the way this initial report came is a girl I'll call Sam, suspended from school when she's called down to the principal's office and found to be in possession of marijuana, which, by the way, she was provided the marijuana from the adult suspects. There was a male and a female, like I said. So mom, as punishment, takes her phone. And mom discovers on the phone that Sam's been in contact with an adult male, and the contact between the two, mom is led to believe, or does come to the conclusion that it looks like Sam's been sexually abused by this adult male based on the communication on Sam's phone. So mom takes Sam's phone, and mom takes Sam to an inpatient hospital for a stay to be treated for some depression and the marijuana use. So while Sam's in the hospital being treated, mom contacts the local police, and that happens to be me. So I'm talking with mom regarding the concerns while Sam's being treated. So I don't initially make contact with Sam. I initially speak to mom. So a couple of things to note. So if you're in the medical field and you come in contact with a child, which often is the case with people who've been exploited or trafficked, they may seek medical care. Children are seen in medical facilities for all different types of things and may potentially have been abused. They don't self-identify, but here's some records. In this particular record, there's a couple of things of interest. She goes in to be treated. She's being protective. Our suspect is not a 20-year-old male, and he's not in a custody battle with his wife. So she's protective of herself, and she's protective of him. And a couple other things of note why this slide is in here. She is vulnerable. She's complaining of being suicidal. She's complaining of depression, and she's using marijuana, again, being provided by the suspects in this particular case. But she's also protective of this male, and she's not identifying herself as a victim. In her mind, she's, what you'll hear later, but in her mind, she's in a relationship with not only the male suspect in this particular case, but the female suspect in this particular case. We don't know that yet. while she's being treated, she's just the what she's reporting about this particular male is not the truth. The male's in his 30s and is definitely not in a custody battle with his wife. And here's just an interesting a fact. 5% to 16% of child victims report. So that's a very, very low percentage of victims who even actually report that they're being victimized or that there's something going on. And false allegations are very, very rare. They are very rare. And in my experience in the 16, 17 years I'm in the Bureau, literally 17 years, a false allegation was incredibly rare. So keep the, and the amount of kids who are even reporting or self-report that they are victim of anything, very, very low. So here are our suspects in this particular case. Again, I'm not identifying them, but the male in this case, 32 years old. The female, who he is married to, 37 years old. The male has no children of his own. The female has 4 biological children, 3 of which actually lived in the home at the time of this case. He's employed as a tow truck driver. She was a former employee of a high school, so kind of a problem there. Throughout the course of the interview, or throughout the course of this investigation, at some point, I do wind up interviewing both of these people, just as a little caveat there, why this is included at the bottom. This is actually straight out of a police report, my police report. The female will later tell me, much later, that these two, just as a side note, a little caveat, that they actually both met. When they did meet, it was through a Craigslist posting. She said she was just bored one night and they met on Craigslist personal ad, and she said that she never did think it would lead to a marriage, but it actually did. Just a little side note. And here's the kind of the rest of how all the other people in this particular case kind of connect. And again, I'm not naming them, but here's how they all kind of connect. You've got the male and the female, they're married. Our victim, Sam, how she actually met this couple was through her best friend, who was a 17, 18-year-old female. That 17 or 18-year-old female met this couple also via Facebook or Instagram. Sam met them through her friend. And then she was to bring in another friend to keep the couple happy. I'll explain a little bit of this more later. I've already alluded to the fact that the female has her own biological kids that live in the home. And then this couple has a neighbor who has a daughter as well. The couple was also interested in and did sexually molest that particular child. And then the female's oldest daughter, a 15-year-old, had a friend who was visiting at the house, and the male suspect is eventually going to ask that daughter and try to sexually molest the oldest daughter's friend. And then Sam also has a friend that they're compelling her to bring this girl into the mix as well. And just as a side note there, if you note that group home, that 15-year-old friend of Sam's lived in a group home, also making her vulnerable to attention and vulnerable to this group with the drugs and other things that they offered. And a lot of this connection was made through Facebook, the instant messenger, and Instagram. So as each girl would come into the mix, they would compel for that girl to bring in another girl. So just like the traffickers would do. And just also as a note too, that this family had a couple dogs that lived in the home. And I'll explain a little bit more about that here in a minute. The suspect and what he actually wanted. We're talking about the male suspect. This is his Facebook. These are his real Facebook posts. And I apologize for some of the comments, but in fact, this is when you ask and think about what did he want. These were out there for everybody to see and comment on. So we talked about how his wife worked at a school. And here's some of the posts that he had on his, they're up today. So it's crude language. And this is the things that he had posted. So these young girls that were meeting him, they actually say in their forensic interviews, they knew what he was about and they knew what he wanted. It'd be pretty clear for adults to know what he was about too. And I am going to read it. I'm a spin around with the dick still inside. Stacy, where did you learn to speak like this? Well, this is what he's posting. If you look off to the side, but how many likes, that top Stacy learned from me, that's the male suspects saying that's his comment. Stacy learned from me. You see in the young girl in the forefront there, and then in the background you see mom kind of distressed about where did Stacy learn to speak like this. So that first top comment, that's the male suspect. And then and then you can see these are other adults commenting and laughing and just see the bottom, the LMAO, everybody knows that that's laughing my ass off. 9 comments, you got somebody sharing it, and then you've got the date there where it's posted. And again, that's the adult male at the top laughing at his own, I guess, cleverness. So people know what he's about, people know what he likes, but he's got more. This is another suspect's Facebook post. Teacher, if you don't come to school to learn, then why do you come here? And the I came looking for booty. So he's very clear about what he wants. He's posting about it, and his comment, LOL, truth. You still got others that like it, commenting on it. In this particular Facebook post, one of the things I found interesting about this one, it is what he's about, no doubt. He's got it on his Facebook post, but the date on that, December 8th of 2015, Sam was called down to the principal's office with possession of marijuana on December 14th of 2015, and I took that report. And just one more, I called daddy in your phone, and it wasn't your father. So daddy is one of those words that is associated with trafficking, children being trafficked, but female victims of trafficking as well. Traffickers like to use that word, and it be associated with that. So it's just one of those common terms. The male suspect, again, just thinks that's really funny. And the victim, when she was interviewed, one of the things that she said is this is the way the male suspect had entered into her phone, his phone number, and entered the female suspect's number into her phone. So that bitch hoe, that bitch doe. So these are, again, just common terminologies and things that he used with this child. She was 15. So just things to look for, things to listen for. And again, he's putting this out there for the whole world to see that this is what he's about. And he met this girl through his wife's Facebook and Instagram. So she's the one working at the school. She's the one going through Instagram. She's friending these kids. And then he meets them, interacts with them, and then gets them trusting him. And then they both will have a relationship with, which is what happened here with Sam. So for these two adults to get to know and eventually get these kids, we're talking about Sam here, but as I mentioned, Sam had met this adult couple through her friend, the 17 or 18-year-old girl. So, and Sam does meet them, but she already knows that she's got an older friend who is spending all this time with this adult couple, and she already knows that her 17, 18-year-old friend is having a relationship with them. So when Sam comes out, Sam does get out of the institution where she's getting some medical help, and she does, I meet with her. She comes to the police department, and I explain the child center to her and what a forensic interview would look like. And ultimately, she does hand me her phone. I was going to seize it, but and she tells me a little bit about what's on the phone. She's telling me that she'd gone on vacation with her family to Florida for a week, and then she spent some time in another state for about 2 weeks before she physically meets this couple. And she's well aware of the fact that this couple's having sex with her older friend. She makes comments like, well, she's this is ultimately going to come out in the forensic interview, but she knows that her older friend is having a sexual relationship with not only just the male suspect, but also the female suspect. But with her phone, as I sees it prior to the forensic interview, she does tell me that she's been requested to send nude pictures to the male suspect, and 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 he has sent nude pictures to her while she's out of state. And she Okay, so the phone's been seized, and then she's referred out to the child center for a forensic interview. During that interview, it's this first interview where other things become very clear. At that time, she starts out explaining things she knows about her friend, her older friend first, and explains things. And when we're talking about this grooming process, she's aware of the relationship with her older friend with this couple, and says things that the older friend was promised with, in particular with the male. The male has promised her older friend that he's going to leave his wife, that he's going to marry the older friend, that he's saving up money to run away and marry the friend, that they're going to have kids together. That's what she knows has already been promised to her older friend. And in the meantime, while she's traveled out of state, both the female suspect and the male suspect have been telling Sam they're getting tired of the older friend, who's, by the way, moved in with this couple, and she's been living there for about a month. They're starting to text Sam and say, we're getting tired of her, we're getting sick of her, we're trying to think of a way to get rid of her. So the older girl has moved out of her family home and moved in with this couple, and all the while they're making her these promises of marriage, runaway, and she's lost her virginity to this adult male. So that's an example of grooming. The couple also provides marijuana, lingerie, those types of things to these girls. And the 15-year-old has knowing all this, has now is explaining during the forensic interview that she's intrigued by this, and getting lots of compliments, that type of thing. And so she's now began a relationship when she gets back and meets him for the first time. Her first initiation to some of this grooming and stuff, like you're talking about exposure to porn and nudity, is watching the adult male have sex with her friend in person. That's how she kind of her first exposure, if you will, to some of this going on. She goes on in her interview to explain that these types of activities happen hundreds of times over the course of the relationship with the adult male and the adult female. They've now kind of got her in, and the older friend is now gone out kind of out by the wayside. And she explains that for brownie points, the older friend was supposed to bring her in. Well, now she's in. And then she goes also on to say that she's supposed to bring in a friend. And so you look at what the headlines are saying, that traffickers will often use vulnerable teenagers online, who are complaining about their parents. Not in this particular case, that wasn't the case, but if they're vulnerable, to recruit other kids. So if you work with kids, or if you're working in a place where you have already vulnerable kids, keep that in mind, that they either traffickers will hang out where vulnerable kids are known to be physically, or they'll send in other kids. What better to have a kid go into, let's say, a high school? They fit right in, they're going to blend right in, and those kids will even know who the vulnerable kids are to take back to a trafficker. And in this particular case, the adult male was very, very good at that. He used his own wife to go through her Instagram, and she's every bit as culpable and every bit as much of a suspect as he was, in that she would friend these kids on Instagram and Facebook, and then let him go right through, pick out which ones he wanted to bring back, and then use the kids to get them as well. And Sam is really great at saying, for brownie points, her older friend was to bring her in, and she literally describes that that's exactly what was going on. And the wife was doing the same thing. They needed to bring in another one to keep him happy. So you've got that exploitation. You've got the literally the photos going back and forth, and it went so far as them recording sexual abuse acts with younger girls. So they would record sexually abusing not only Sam, but it turns out through the course of the investigation, others as well. So, and I showed that a diagram earlier in the presentation where one of Sam's friends actually lived in a group home for kids, which would literally make her more at risk, if you will. So consent. So consent is confusing for kids. Clearly, a crime against a child doesn't require any kind of consent. But the reason I put this up here is a little bit opposite. The reason for this is because kids are confused by that. In this particular case, Sam describes being consent, and at one point in the interview talks about um, having consented. The suspect used that against her. He talks, she talks about him telling her, "You wanted this. You wanted this relationship. You agreed to this. You knew what you were doing," and her being so confused by whether or not she had consented that she wasn't sure at one point when what she describes the night just before her birthday where the female and male suspect had given her acid to take and then tying her up, which she said was a pretty regular thing, that in the early morning hours of this particular night, she's trying to tell the forensic interviewer she was hurt by that, but so confused by whether or not, since she'd consented in her mind, she'd consented and consented to the what she calls a relationship, that even though as the night progressed, she's still tied up and hurt. She's confused as to whether or not she had consented, although she can't. She's trying to describe how she was hurt and not even sure if she could tell the forensic interviewer, "I was hurt." She's describing it being hurt and bleeding, and still trying to find the words to tell the interviewer exactly about that, and still kind of explaining, "I was hurt by that," and then says, but I consented, but I guess I can't consent." So if you think about that on a broader basis, different cases, think about little kids who are given money or told to be quiet, and this is just our secret. Later, as they learn, hey, this is not what's normal, that maybe not till they go to school, maybe not till they're talking to friends and realizing, hey, this isn't what goes on in our families, that they're not realizing there's anything going on, and they may think, hey, I in their minds, just in kids' minds, they're not understanding what consent looks like. They've agreed all along, or thinking this is just what goes on in our families. So consent is a very confusing thing for kids. If you go back to that statistic of how many kids never even disclose, this idea of consent, or you went along with it, is very, very confusing for kids, which is why so many kids never identify as victims, because they, in their heads, they're thinking, "I went along with it." So it's very, very confusing for them. The reason forensic interviews are so important is because the way they're asked questions, clearly not leading questions, is because they get a chance to just tell the story. They may not know what they have to say is important. They may not know how much they have to tell because they're not identifying as victims. So I put the consent slide in there. As the victim tells her story, you get a sense of what's really going on in this particular house. Coercion is another thing that's not needed necessarily for a child trafficking case, for sure, but for kids in general. If you have it, it can it can change the charge or the case, and it can certainly amp up what you might be able to charge a suspect with. But in this particular case, you would need to show coercion for an adult case. But in this particular case, there was some coercion. But in this particular case, Sam does talk about things like drugs, which I've alluded to. But during the course of this forensic interview, again, just speaking with her and listening to what she has to say, we wind up learning about guns and other types of things that in her mind weren't necessarily important enough to mention until she's asked about that. To her, it was happening enough that she might not have mentioned it. So kids who are in violent situations or witness violence on a regular basis might not know that what they're seeing, witnessing, or even experiencing themselves aren't necessarily important enough to mention until they're asked about it, or they have an opportunity to mention it. So coercion would be an important factor for trafficking if you're an adult, but for kids, you definitely don't need to prove or show coercion. But in this particular case, in Sam's forensic interview, while she's speaking, in fact, when the question's posed, she's able to describe having guns put to her chest, that they were there, and later that's used to prepare a search warrant. So with this particular case, after Sam's interview, and she's the first, she was the reason this case was put together. And after speaking with her, that's exactly what happened. Search warrants were prepared. Myself and several detectives, again, animal control because there were animals in the house, ICAC because there was going to be some technology we expected to find at the house. We prepare the search warrants, go out to the house, and neither adult were located at the house. They were located and then later taken to the police department. But we go to the house and find all the things that Sam's able to describe in the forensic interview, locate all that evidence, sees it exactly as she's described. So she's given this opportunity to describe all these different types of evidence, and we're able to seize all this evidence. And that starts the case. The two adults are taken into custody. They are interviewed, ultimately confess to multiple different crimes, and that's actually the beginning of the case, because as I said, the adult female has multiple kids. So I'm going to stress the importance of not forgetting the witnesses. So if you're someone who hears, let's say, maybe the first outcry from a child, you hear a first disclosure from a child, I wouldn't advocate trying to interview them at all. I'm trying to impress upon the fact that a forensic interview is a really great way to go. And I'm hopefully maybe I can kind of outline why. After the arrest and the two adult suspects were interviewed, the Children's Division is involved, and Children's Division does go out and talk to the other children, none of whom had any complaints. None of them report any problems. The adult male, who would be their stepfather, they report everything's great. They report the house is fine. It's not dirty. Everything's great. No worries at all. So we get no other disclosures of any sort from any of the other children. These kids, like I said, they're not locked in cages. They go to school. They're free to come and go. They have biological fathers where they live, so no worries. They're not reporting any type of disclosures. But we interview them at the child center sometime later. So this case comes out in December. They're interviewed in February. This is a quote from the oldest biological daughter of the adult, a female suspect. And this is a quote that she said, "You kind of put two and two together." So when the adult biological daughter is interviewed, again, having not reported any issues to Children's Division, initially saying everything's fine, discloses nothing to anyone, not to let's say school teachers, not to her biological father where she lives half the time. This is a kid who's got a cell phone, goes to school, and appears fine, except, her mom's been arrested. When she comes in for a forensic interview, has a lot to say. And this is one of her quote, again, you kind of put two and two together. What she goes on to describe are things like this. When she's there at the home with those two younger siblings that also live there, at least half the time, she says she could hear the adult male suspect having sex with Sam in the bedroom while her mother's in the kitchen area with them. She could hear that, and she knew that that's what was going on. She also reported being told by her mother to lie to her biological father, who would ask who Sam was. These girls are the same age, to tell her dad that this girl was a friend of hers. This biological daughter would say, "I didn't know Sam. I just knew she was a girl that was always at my house, and I did not know her." These two these two kids did not go to the same school. She just knew that this girl was always at her house and she was told to lie about who she was. Um, this this girl here, the daughter, would describe going to places like trunk or treat, and they'd all climb in the car together. Um, which, if you're looking at that, you might see like what might look like something that would fit. And what would you do with that? You've got a child told to lie. You might not would do anything with that. If you got kids who are told by their mom, um, she sits in the, they're all sitting in the family and they're off on a happy, what would look like a happy, family trip. There might not be anything that would look out of place. So I guess my point to that is, this kid did not identify a problem. She doesn't say that to anyone else until she comes in for a forensic interview. Does she say, "Hey, this is what I heard and saw"? She goes on. She goes on to talk about, in this point here, you don't know what you don't know. Um, this biological daughter goes on to describe a couple other things. Um, she goes on to talk about her mom encouraging her to sleep with uh, her the adult male who would be a stepdad. Again, the adult female encouraging her daughter to get in bed with and sleep with the stepdad, um, while mom's at work. So again, you've got still got that recruiting thing, and at this point, you've got almost a family trafficking situation where you got mom encouraging her to get in bed with dad, um, and she'd never disclosed that to anyone. She'd never told anybody, never said a word about it. But you get her into the forensic interview there, and she's finally able to disclose those things that nobody had heard. So if we hadn't have gotten her in there, we would not have known that. And she's asked, "How do you know? How do you know he he number one wanted to have sex with you, and how do you know that your mom was okay with that?" And her statement to that was, "Because she told me to." So then we have that added element of, now we really know what's going on. A family pet. So we interview then a younger brother, uh, the youngest child of the adult female, and other things we wouldn't have known unless we had asked him to come in for an interview, the youngest uh, child. And he describes liking the adult male, getting to do lots of fun stuff with the adult male suspect. But in the building a rapport part of the forensic interview, talk about family pets, and also liking the adult male suspect. Again, had reported no problems, but when you get into uh, adult or family pets, he describes having witnessed on a couple of different occasions watching the uh, adult male suspect shoot the family pets with a pellet gun, and hearing the sound that the animals made when they're hit and shot with them, the yelping sound. He thought that they did that and shot the pets to teach them and to train them. Again, they one of the pets was deceased. The other had been taken by animal control. Upon my first initial arrival there was nobody to leave the dogs with, so they'd already been taken. But he cried when telling that story. But he also described other things like witnessing domestic violence, watching his mom being, I think, thrown through a wall. But he had a lot to say that he had never told anybody, in addition to watching the dogs get shot with these pellets. There were other stuff that he'd seen. But he also described, you know, liking stepdad, and reporting that things were also good too, and that he was a lot of fun. And so did the other daughter. He was fun. We got money. We got walking around cash. So you go back to that kind of that grooming thing, and he was a lot of fun. This male suspect married to mom, but he also witnessed some violence as well. So there was talk about some confusion there. Here's an evidence list of stuff that was taken out of the house. And when you're interviewing, when the kids get interviewed and they describe, Sam in particular describes all these items that we might find in the house. She doesn't describe guns down to a T, but when you're interviewing a kid and you can make them truth tellers, they're telling you the truth, and you're able to go into a house and seize all these items that they describe, you're just really piling on truth after truth after truth. So not only do they they rarely they don't disclose very often, but when they do, and you're able to go into a house and show how much truth they've just told, truth after truth after truth, this is part of that. You're able to photograph a house where, and places in a house where they probably shouldn't be. That's just truth after truth after truth. So that's a big part of it. And she does describe guns, and I kind of alluded to that, where she's talking about having had a gun held to her chest, and that he had lots of guns, among other things. There was she talks a lot about different sex toys, and could describe them down to size, shape, um, where they were in the house, and what they were contained in, and what they did with them, and um, just in great detail. So finding them exactly where she says they'll be, the color that they were, the shape that they were, uh, that is making her just a truth teller, truth. So that stuff is key. And then locating them was just absolutely makes her nothing but just truth after truth. So moving on to trauma bonding. Trauma bonding was the actual definition, a cycle of physical or emotional abuse that creates a strong attachment between an abused person and their abuser, reinforced by periods of love and affection, and then periods of devaluation and emotional abuse. So trauma bonding was I mean, an actual word or definition I'd never really heard or thought of, being a detective. So you're talking a mere year and a half ago, but it was something I was aware of. Most people don't call for police. They certainly aren't calling for detectives and saying, hey, could you send a couple detectives over here? I'm having a super great day. Could really use a couple detectives because I really want to talk about what a great day I'm having. I was very aware of that, and aware of the fact that if I was interacting with people at work, they were in some sort of crisis, most likely. Something traumatic had happened. But this idea and the definition itself was fairly new to me in this type of term. I was aware most people were, probably traumatized. So this is the actual definition, and why. You're thinking about kids in trauma, children in trauma. This is why I put this up here. And they may be, some of them, not even recognize that that's what's going on. Um, and then what that looks like. So if you think about a child who's been abused by a parent, or being trafficked or exploited by a parent, they love that parent. That's their norm. And then you get even more confused when you've got a child who's thinks that they're consenting. So you think about those teens, or even a young child who's getting gifts and loves the parent, or it's their secret, or they're getting money. You've got an older teen who's getting some drugs and thinking, quote unquote, I consented to this. I thought I wanted this. This particular adult male picked his victims based on ones he thought could, quote unquote, be mature enough to handle the relationship, what he wanted. He's made it pretty clear what he wanted. So it gets a little difficult for kids to say, was I victimized when I, quote unquote, wanted it? And he hammered that home to these kids in their minds. You chose this, you wanted this. And he hammered home their ages. No one's going to believe you anyway, because of the things they've been doing, which I think is probably, unfortunately, a common theme with traffickers and abusers of all sorts, all different types of crimes. You wanted this, you'll get in trouble. And oftentimes the kids do wind up getting in trouble. Sam herself was caught with marijuana, so she could have been in trouble had some of this other stuff not come out. She wasn't, uh, but that happens. So here's what winds up happening with these two suspects. They're charged with multiple crimes. Um, when I put up their jail math, it's hard for me because they were charged with many crimes and wound up pleading to just a few. In addition to Sarah, there were other charges which would have included the the down to the animal abuse. The male suspect is serving 22 years. In addition to charges with sexual charges against Sam, the neighbor girl also was interviewed and disclosed sexual assault on her. Um, so this is some of his charges: statutory rape, promoting child pornography. So when a male suspect is arrested and brought in for an interview, on his phone was found actual video of him sexually abusing Sam. That's just off his phone on that initial interview. So 22 years for him, and for the female, it's the same, 22 years for her. In the search warrant was located multiple different types of technology, hard drive, computers, cell phones, and during a search of those, which take more time than your initial that day that you're serving everything. So when those were searched through, there were child sexual abuse material, which used to be called child pornography. It's child sexual abuse material. That was found on a hard drive in the home, and was discovered that there were images of some of the victims using a bathroom, so that a child abuse material was found, and so the female was charged with invasion of privacy, and also then some statutory sodomy, a couple different counts for, I believe, at least one of the victims for sure. And then you've got attempt enticement. That's by phone. Here's how the statutory sodomy and statutory rape is defined by state statute. It's somebody over the age of 21 having either deviant sexual intercourse and or sexual intercourse with someone who is less than 17. Deviant sexual intercourse is just sexual contact that basically is not intercourse. That's a D felony. Invasion of privacy, knowingly photographs, films, videotapes, produces, or otherwise creates an image without that person's consent, while that other person would be in a partial nudity or full nudity in a place where they would have reasonable expectation of privacy. Promoting child pornography, which again, the term now, our statutes may read this way, but child pornography, I mean, a child can't consent to that. It's child sexual abuse material. They're being abused if they're being in any way, shape, or form photographed or videoed this way. Or I just want to stress that when we know better, we'll do better. So this is what I just want to stress about that word. But when a person possesses with the intent to promote or does promote any type of that sexual abuse material, so any child that's under the age of 18 that is photographed or videoed that way. The male suspect did have that video on his phone. And enticing would be trying to solicit, coax, or lure anybody with electronic communication. So let's say via cell phone to engage in sexual conduct. So if you've got a person who's less than 15 and they're trying to coax or lure them. And I'm going over some of these statutes just to let you know this is how some of these charging decisions did happen and some of the things that they were actually committing. Intentionally or purposely causes injury or suffering to an animal. I think shooting a dog with a pellet gun would certainly qualify for that. All right, change of gears here just a little bit. Here's kind of some of the things that we're seeing and happening in our local community. And these are just some cases that have come through the child center itself, just some of the things we're hearing through forensic interviews. And again, kids don't normally come through here and say, hey, I need to be interviewed, or hey, can you help me because I'm getting trafficked. That's not what's happening. They're not identifying as victims. They're just like going through everyday life. And here's some things that happen. But when they're in here being interviewed, it's what we're hearing. So the jewel pods for sex, you have young 12, 13-year-old girls, and I say girls because it's more than one, who've come through here being interviewed, and here's what we're hearing. So they'll go through their Instagram, more than likely it's Instagram accounts, and they'll look for an adult male, and I do mean adults. We're talking somebody who's over the age of 21 who they think will buy them jewel pods, because jewel pods are expensive. And because they don't have money, they will offer up, and maybe they have money once, but because it gets expensive, they're offering up sex for these men, and I do mean men over the age of 21, to buy them jewel pods. And when it goes pretty quickly bad for these girls who are clearly too young to handle anything like this, and they wind up exchanging sex for jewel pods, and then quickly realize something bad's happened because it gets out of hand for them. And that's literally a trafficking situation. These young girls are on social media, and men are finding girls that way too. So we've had several cases like that come through where clearly adult men are exploiting and hurting young girls who are just looking. And by no means am I okay with the jewel pod situation, but we're hearing that coming through the 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 forensic interviews, and it's been more than one. The semi-truck driver situation was a truck driver who was in a southern state who had picked up a girl um, and made his way through uh, the state here and wound up in another county, but served by our child center. And the truck was stopped, and the girl did identify that he was hurting her um, sexually, and she abused, and she came in here for an interview. The girl was recovered and given back to mom. I do not know if charges were filed on that particular case. I don't think they were, but that was a case where it was highly suspicious for being trafficked due to the fact that he's taken her state to state. It was very suspicious, and that would be one of those not your typical, but very alarming for trafficking. And she was brought in here. She was returned, thank God, to her mother. Uh, uh, Sex in exchange for hunting land. So you've got your suburban here with the jewel pods. I kind of picked a couple of these just to kind of show what it would look like in different geographical locations and maybe things you wouldn't typically think of. So jewel pods is just literally your local community. The truck driver was across country, if you will. Exchange for hunting land is going to be a very rural area and maybe not something anybody would think of. But you have a dad who wanted to hunt some property and has a young daughter, 12, 13 years old, but teen. And they go to this land where they want to hunt, and there's an owner's son of this property, and he was trying to, well, he didn't try. He talked his daughter, didn't talk. Let me rephrase that as I'm trying to explain this. There's a boy there who's throwing a party at this property. Dad, who's always around the kids, always hanging with the kids, kind of your first clue, is encouraging this daughter to have sex with this boy. She doesn't want any part of that, but he's continuing. There's alcohol there. There's this whole gathering of kids, but he's letting this boy know that his daughter would be okay with that, although she's telling him, no, 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 I'm not. But the boy, picking up on what dad's saying, the encouragement of that, takes this girl and winds up raping her. And dad's wanting that to happen because he wants to befriend the kid in the family to hunt this land, and he makes that known. The reason he's so friendly is he wants to hunt that property. But dad, being kind of, and I'm being sarcastic when I say this, father of the year, has another son who's younger than that. He's also interviewed, by the way, here at the child center. The boy wants a motorbike or something. So dad takes the kid who's even younger than the daughter out for a drive, and the boy's telling him he wanted a motorcycle. So he encourages that kid to steal a motorcycle and literally point one out, and they steal together. So that's that kind of father. But the point to that is that's a more rural area than maybe some of us are used to. Not all of us, but some of us. So those are just some of the things we're actually hearing in interviews. And I make a couple points to that. It doesn't sound like that trap, Taken, the movie Taken. These kids aren't locked up and not able to move about and or report if they wanted to report. None of these kids came in here and said, hey, I've been trafficked. Can you help me? Nor do they maybe even think there was something wrong with what they were doing, or that they had been victimized until they come in here and or someone was made aware of what was going on with them. So that's my point to some of those, just to kind of give you an idea of how it can sound so differently. Another point to that was a few years ago, even for myself, would I have said, hey, this is maybe different than just a child case. This may rise to a different level. Maybe they need different types of help. So, and here's some statistics for the Child Advocacy Center. In 2019, the Child Advocacy Center provided forensic interviews for 11 victims of CSEC, and that's that commercial sexual exploitation of children, CSEC crimes. In 2020, that number jumped to 29. And so far in 2021, we have worked with 109 children involved in CSEC cases. So there could be a couple reasons for that big jump. And again, as I told you, my position started here in January of this year, and we've really taken a bigger, broader look at what CSEC really looks like, and some of that data is going to jump because I've been keeping better track of it. Not that they weren't before, but it's broader than we even thought. So you do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. So that's kind of where we're at with that. And that absolutely includes me. And I've learned a lot in recognizing that it could actually be more than we thought. So here's what comes next. If you now know what trafficking and exploitation looks like, you can report it if you suspect it. I'd say report to your local police department and also join our coalition. So I'm out at a booth, so you can sign up as you leave. I am forming a coalition. So again, come out and talk with me or ask me any questions. And here's my contact information. I also have with me booklets and cards you can to learn more and share with others. And if you have any questions or if you need any additional training, by all means, please contact me. Again, questions. I'm out at a booth, so just come out and feel free to contact me. Thank you for listening.